go to the word of the Lord this morning, let us confess together our common faith from the New City Catechism, question 3. Question asks, how many persons are there in God? There are 3 persons in one true and living God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. They are the same in substance, equal in power and glory. Amen. If any of you, just a side note before we jump into the text this morning, if any of you are interested in a hard copy of the New City Catechism, we have some extra copies, and let me know, and we'd be happy to provide one for you. And if we run out, we'll order some more. So, with that, turn in your Bibles this morning to Ephesians chapter 4. And this morning we're continuing to look at Ephesians 4, verses 11 to 16. One pastor and theologian called this the Magna Carta of church ministry. I agree with him. I believe this is the most instructive and concise blueprint for God's design for how the church should function within all of Scripture. And so because of that, we're kind of slowing down a little bit, and we're going to examine it together. Now, when I came to Arbor Drive, I realized that some of you were not here before I got here. You've come since I've been here. And when I came to Arbor Drive 9 years ago, the elders, one of which was Ron, who just led us in that pastoral prayer, and Josh in particular, had already been wrestling with this conviction about the direction of the church needing to change. And I recall many conversations with them and trying to understand before I came here what they were seeing and what the struggle was, and then coming here and some experiences myself, kind of trying to diagnose that. And from my understanding, there was a lack of health in the church, and one of the reasons I was hired was to help address that. Now, I had preached 3 sermons before I came here, so if you're newer, count yourself fortunate and blessed that you were not here during those, that first 6 months, because there were some doozies. But one of the things that I was wrestling with, and one of the things that was a struggle for me, was there's all these ideas out there for how to grow the church in health. If you go online, and you can find blogs all over the place, and a lot of them have, hey, here's 10 steps for this, or 5 steps for this, and that really is what our modern Christian life can be boiled down to in a lot of cases. We have 10-step programs or 5-step programs, and we want those 5-step programs and 10-step programs. And what I was wrestling with was this: does any of that require any dependence upon the Holy Spirit? Does any of that require God to move in the church? Can any of that happen without God being involved? And in a lot of cases, what I came to the conclusion of is, yeah, you can manufacture that. You can create that on your own. And then I read some things about Paul, like, when I came among you, I determined to know nothing but Christ and Him crucified. Or, we preach Christ and Him crucified. A stumbling block to the Jews and foolishness to the Gentiles, but to those who are being saved, right? I kept on coming across these verses in 1 Timothy chapter 1, where Paul tells Timothy, stay in Ephesus, love the people, preach the word. And that's kind of God's plan for church growth, right? And then I came to Ephesians chapter 4. And it's just kind of blown my mind. And this text has been a North Star to me over the years, because it clearly lays out how God designed His church to function and work. And really, what really comes down to in my mind is this: the church is not the invention of man, but is the creation and idea of God. Right? That's the first thing that we have to settle. The first thing we have to settle is, where did this thing come from? Whose is it? Who designed it? Who owns it? Who has rights over it? Who do we listen to? Do we listen to the gurus on blogs, or do we listen to God's word? Do we look to God's word to instruct us? And because it is God's, it is our responsibility not to be clever and creative with the church, but to go to God's word and to understand how the church should function. It's our responsibility to align ourselves with God's design for the church, because that's the only place of blessing and flourishing. And more importantly than that, that is the only place where God is going to be glorified. So if the results are due to our clever innovation and schemes, if our results are envied or admired by the business leaders of the world, or if we're taking our cues from the wise men of the world, who gets the glory in that case? However, what I've come to discover is that God's economy is upside down and backwards from everything in the world. If we look to God in His Word and step out in faith, trusting Him as the all-wise God and Lord over the church, looking to Him for wisdom and empowerment to carry out His instructions and design, who gets the glory there? And beloved, that's one of the hardest things of living a Christian life, is to just simply trust and obey God's word rather than all of the intuitions that we've been discipled by the culture to think this is the right way to do it, this is the right way to do it, this is the right way to do it. Because, like I said, God's economy is upside down and backwards from the man's economy. Let me put it this way. The things we look to and have been trained by the world to trust are not the way the things work in the kingdom, right? You trust the experts, right? You become an expert, then you lead, and everybody just kind of fall in line and look to the expert. That's how the world works. But what we're going to see today is that God's economy, the kingdom, and expressed in the church functions very differently from that. God's design for His church is backwards from the world's design. God says, I've given gifts to every believer, and every believer has the Spirit and shares in the responsibility for the church together. So last week we saw that God has given pastors to equip the saints. We saw the role and responsibility of the pastors is to equip, and that is done through faithfully teaching, preaching, applying, and helping people live in light of the truth of God's word. And one of the most important texts for that is Acts chapter 6. In Acts chapter 6, there in verse 1, there was a complaint among the Hellenists against the Hebrews because their widows were being neglected in the daily distributions. There's a very practical problem in the church here. And listen to the response of the apostles. And the 12 summoned the full number of the disciples and said, "It is not right that we should give up preaching the word to serve tables. Therefore, brothers, pick out from among you 7 men of good repute, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we will appoint to this duty. But we will devote ourselves to prayer and to the ministry of the word." And they said, what they said pleased the whole gathering, and they chose Stephen and so, and they set these before the apostles, and they prayed and laid their hands on them. So what we see is very early on, there was an unwillingness to deviate from the priority of prayer and the word in the leadership of the church, or in the pastors, elders of the church. And this is a big theme in the pastoral epistles. We saw that last week. But the question becomes, if the pastors are to equip the saints, the question is, what for? What do we equip for? And the answer is simple. It's right here in the text. It's ministry. And yet in our culture, we need to carefully consider what this is. So that's going to be our focus today. This is the word of the Lord from Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 to 16. And He gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ, until we attain the unity of faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children, tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness in deceitful schemes. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way unto Him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow, so that it builds itself up in love. This is the word the Lord has for us this morning, and it is eternally true. The way we're going to address this is by asking 2 questions. Number 1, who is responsible for the work of ministry? And number 2, what is the work of ministry? What does that look like? First question, who is responsible? So the notion, as I said before, of equipping or preparing in the sense of making someone adequate or sufficient for something, filling up what is lacking, that suits this context. However, it does require an object, right? What are you equipping for? Right? That makes no sense to say just equip the saints. There has to be some thing that they are being equipped for. And the answer in this text is the purpose for which we are equipped is the work of the ministry. Now, it's a very, very simple question. Who in this text does the work of the ministry? Right? That is such a foundational question, and yet it's hardly ever asked. Who is responsible for the work of ministry here? When we look at this text, pastors are equipping the saints to do the ministry. Saints in this text are set apart ones. That's the meaning of saints. They're ones who have been called out, set apart. The word means made holy, right? They're people who once were living in the world as the world, and God has called them out of darkness into his marvelous light. Have you ever wondered what purpose that happened for, right? Have you ever felt like your Christian life, you're just kind of like aimlessly wandering around trying to figure out what the heck you're supposed to do? All right, I know I'm a Christian, and I'm called out. I'm called to something. What am I called to? Well, let me suggest to you that the most basic and fundamental place to look to find out what you are called to as a Christian is right here in Ephesians chapter 4. And let me also submit to you that unless we do small, basic, elementary things well, God is not going to graduate us beyond those things to other things that he has for us. Right? You don't get more responsibility if you haven't mastered the responsibility that you've already been given. And so this is one of the fundamental places that we need to look. Every believer is called to ministry. Every believer. And so ministry is an activity of the saints for which the leaders are preparing and equipping them. And Christ has given special ministers, we might say, so that they will make God's people fully qualified, as one pastor put it, and thus enables them to serve their Lord by serving one another. That's the focus of pastors, and that should be the focus of us all as believers. We are to be about the work of ministry. So the pastor is another way to put it. Pastor is to focus within the church at giving the saints the tools from the Word of God to care for one another well, to minister to one another. And this is one of the reasons, as just kind of a side note, this is one of the reasons why the worship service at Arbor Drive is not built around unbelievers. If you're an unbeliever and are here, we love that you're here. And in 1 Corinthians, Paul talks about unbelievers being among the church, but no disrespect, he doesn't talk about the worship service being focused on the unbeliever. In fact, the unbeliever, when confronted with the people of God worshiping and ministering to one another in the worship service, says God is really among them and falls on their faces. The church, the gathering of the saints, the worship of God's people is for God's people. It's aimed at God's people. It is not primarily focused on unbelievers who might be coming. And so in order to understand the solution, you have to understand the problem, right? In order to provide a good solution, you have to understand the problem. So many pastors don't understand the problem and attempt to provide solutions that deviate from God's appointed focus. So it's the lines of demarcation and the focus here are very clear in this text. Pastors equip the saints so that saints can effectively minister to one another. All of them. No one is excluded. Every single believer. So think about what it means to be a part of a healthy family for a minute. Mom and dad don't do everything. Mom and dad do equip the children to help and be a productive part of the family. Everyone has a role, and all contribute for the good of the family as a whole together. And our society has lost this, but the nuclear family is not about each individual and what they can get. It's about the health and flourishing of the whole. And the only way the family is healthy and flourishing is if everyone takes responsibility for their role within the family and participates wholeheartedly and lives that out in the life of the family. And so under the direction of wise and loving mom and dad, each person is taught and helped to contribute and helped in learning to contribute. And each person only reaps the maximum benefit and blessing when they are committed to one another and not themselves. Families look out for one another. They help one another. They meet needs of one another. They support one another. They encourage one another. And it absolutely will not work. And everyone will be miserable if everyone is there for what they can get or doesn't play their role in the family. You can ask my parents when I was a teenager. That's what I was as a teenager. I was there for myself, and I didn't want to fulfill my responsibilities. It made life miserable. It's the same idea Paul has here. Every single believer in the church is important and has a role to play. You are either ministering and building up the body, or you are harming and tearing it down. The focus is on the collective health of the church and not the individual. Stop individualizing this text. It's not about just you. It's about the whole, which is doubly hard for independent-minded Americans to grasp. It's our responsibility. In addition to building up the whole, we also are built up, right? So these things aren't mutually exclusive. They work together, as we're going to see in a moment. So let me put it another way. You're either a propeller or an anchor, and both of them affect the whole ship, right? You're either a propeller driving the ship forward, or you're an anchor that gets dropped and is dragging the ship off to the side or slowing the ship down. Paul's vision of the church is not that pastors would be behind the congregation, prodding them along and poking them forward and being like, let's go, let's go. The idea is that everyone would be a propeller and would be moving the body toward growing together through fulfilling the ministry that God has given them. Again, I go back to Acts chapter 6. It's not good that we should be distracted from this. Let's help you figure it out. What was the problem there? The problem was that there were certain Christians that were not getting the distribution of food, certain widows that were not getting the distribution of food. Now, here's what the pastors didn't do. Let me fix that for you. Let me get involved in that. Let me come up with 17 really brilliant ways that we can solve this problem, and I'll do all of them. No, what they did was they mobilized the church, using and leveraging the gifts within the church that God had already given to address this problem. Listen, this is so important. So important. This is God's design for his church, and it includes you. Churches will not flourish without the saints doing the work of ministry. And listen, these people didn't stand around waiting to be told what to do. They didn't hire a professional to do it for them. They didn't contract it out. They just did some simple, basic things in Acts chapter 6. Or go back to Acts chapter 2. What did they do? What did the early church do? They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, the breaking of bread, and prayers. In fact, if you go back there, one of the things that you see is that the fact that they ministered to one another and cared for one another actually had an impact outside of just themselves. And awe came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those that were being saved. No brilliant outreach strategy. No dedicated guy that's going to coerce and cajole people into volunteering for the outreach ministry that everybody agrees we need, but nobody wants to participate in. No, this is such a different picture. This is the people of God caring for one another, doing ministry for one another, and that actually is God's plan for how the church grows because he adds to their number. Listen, why would he add to an unhealthy church? Why would he add numbers to a church that is not doing a good job at caring for the ones that they've already been given? This is so crucial. So important. I remember there was a church revitalization conference that the district put on, and Jim Capaldo, our district minister, asked me to speak on it, or speak at it. And there was this guy that went in front of me, and man, he had all sorts of solutions. Man, 10 steps to this. Here's how you organize a car wash for single moms, and here's how you do this, and here's how you do this. And I mean, he had spent a lot of time thinking about this. I do one thing. I take a text, I read the text, I explain the text, and I apply the text. I am a one-trick pony. That's all. I think Capaldo might have known that when he asked me to do this, but if he didn't before, he did after, because that's all I did. I opened up 1 Timothy chapter 1. Stay in one place, love the people, preach the word. That's God's plan for church growth and church health. And I said in that process, and it was a collective gasp when I said this, I said, I don't want more people. What? You don't want more people? That's the whole point of the church, according to everything we read. I said, no, I don't want more people. I want the people that are there to grow. I want the people that are there to minister to one another. I want the people that are there to make disciples so that when God brings new people, they're stepping into a healthy, fertile environment for their own growth. Right? I don't have time to add more people. I'm trying to help the people that are there. Like, go back to the basics. And that's what Paul goes back to here. It is just basic Christianity one-on-one. These people just did. They just did it. And listen, if anybody didn't know what they were doing, it was the first generation of Christians. Maybe I should take that back, because it seems with every successive generation, we get more good idea fairies that show up, and we get further and further away from God's design. Here's the short version. Your gifts aren't for you, they're for the body. And God has uniquely wired you and uniquely placed you here for a purpose. And that purpose involves, for whatever else it might involve, it involves for you to be involved in the ministry to other Christians here at this church. Somehow that has degenerated into a profession financed by spectators. And it makes sense, right? Because think of the needs of a church just our size. Think of all of the needs in this church. I heard one pastor use this illustration. Have you ever seen the guy with 10 sticks and 10 plates, and he goes around and spins a plate on a stick and sets it down and starts another one and then starts another one and starts another one. By the time he gets to the 10th one, he's going back to the first one because that one's starting to wobble. He picks that one up, gets that one going again, and then he's constantly running around from plate to plate to plate to plate to plate to plate, trying to keep all these spinning plates going in the air. That's a perfect illustration for what many people think pastoral ministry is today. Just keeping plates spinning. We're going to do this program over here. We're going to do this thing over here. We got this. This person came up with a good idea here. This person came up with, and it all funnels back. But that is contra God's design. I have one stick and one plate I'm concerned with because that's the one that God has given me. Preach and minister the word to equip the saints for the work of ministry. That's it. I'm not going to apologize for it. I'm not going to back down from it. That's my job. That's our job as elders. If God has given you a good idea for ministry, guess what? I bet you he wants you involved in it. And if he doesn't, you'll know because you won't want to do it when it comes back on you. Like, I have this wonderful idea. That's great. How can I help you get that going? Oh, I don't want to do it. I want somebody else to do it, right? No. God has given you that passion. He's given you that desire for a purpose. I'm not going to stand before God and say, hey, I kept 10 plates going, but the one that you gave me was neglected half the time. Because I actually am really committed to and believe this is the way for the church that God has ordained. And I'm not wavering on it. And in a practical sense even, one person is incapable of managing all of that, right? That's why he gave us one another. That's why he put us in a body. Jesus has designed for those needs to be met by the whole church. So the first thing we see here is the clear instruction from our Lord that pastors are given to equip the saints for the work of ministry. And so we all have a role. We're to be about the work of ministry. So that leads to the second question. What's ministry? That's a big one. We need to answer that one. Because there's a lot of ideas about what ministry is and what ministry isn't. So what is ministry? I think we find the answer in the second half of verse 12. Paul says to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ. I think that's it. That's what ministry is. Building up the body. Is that vague enough for you? I'm going to get into some specifics in a minute, but for right now, let's just sit with that for a second. Ministry is building up the body. Again, it's not about you. It's not about your own individual, personal, felt needs. It's about the health of the church. It's about your brothers and sisters. Do you see how God takes? And if we're going to be really faithful in ministry, the first thing we have to see is that it's not about me. Right? So many people make ministry about them. They get their identity out of it. They get their sense of purpose out of it. They feel like they're getting their justification out of it. Like, I'm doing good for God. He's got to accept me now. No. God gave you gifts for other people. Ministry is about other people. Jesus came not to be served, but to serve. It's the same word. Ministry means service. So that's our first clue. And the second one is it's actually for building up the body. It's for the good of the whole. The body is built up when the word is faithfully taught and applied because the saints are equipped through that to serve one another. That's the meaning of this word, as I said, service. It's serving one another by leveraging the capacities, the gifts, the abilities, the strengths, the passions that God has given you and I to build up the body. A theme throughout chapter 4 has been unity, and we see that unity is achieved through diversity. None of us are exactly the same. All of us are unique. This is the one time that you're a super special snowflake. Right? And yet, God has placed you in this church to leverage the way that he made you for the good of the whole. There's an incredible unity that comes through this kind of diversity. So let me show you from Scripture what ministry looks like. I'm just going to rattle a few of these off. Now, you can go back and you can look them up later if you want, but they should be relatively familiar to you. Hebrews 13, 12 to 14. It talks about exhorting one another. Verse 15 to 19. Through him, let us continually offer up a sacrifice of praise to God that is the fruit of the lips that acknowledge his name. Do not neglect to do good and to share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God. Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls as those who will give an account. Let them do this with joy, without groaning. Pray for us. So the first thing we see is that there's do not neglect the meeting in Hebrews chapter 10. Do not neglect gathering together, but figure out how to stir one another up to love and good works. Exhort one another. Pray for one another. In Ephesians 4, 1-2, be patient, humble, and gently bear with one another. In Ephesians 4:29, build up by how we speak to one another, refrain from gossip and maligning one another, and instead encourage and give grace to one another with our speech. In Matthew 18, ministry looks like confronting sin so that your brother might become aware of it and come to repentance. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 4, it's not looking to your own interest, but to the interests of others. In Colossians 3:13, it's forgiving one another. In Philippians 4, 2-3, it's agreeing in the Lord and not bickering with one another. In 1 Thessalonians 5:11, it's encouraging and building each other up. In Jude 1:20, it's strengthening each other's faith and praying for one another. In 1 Thessalonians 5:14, it's admonishing the idle, encouraging the faint-hearted, helping the weak, and being patient with them all. In 1 Corinthians 12:7, it's using your gifts within the body which God has given you for the common good of the body as a whole. In 1 John 3:8, I think sums it up well. Don't just love in word, but in action. Now listen, that took about 2 minutes of thinking to come up with that. If we sit down together and we spend some time, I bet you we can come up with 1,000 different things that ministry looks like. And that's the point. Don't truncate it down into one thing that has been culturally accepted as ministry. There's all sorts of different ways to minister to one another. See, we need to understand this biblically and not culturally. And in this text, hear me on this, okay? It's not starting some new program, and it's not outward focused. It's doing the basic, ordinary, simple things that God has ordained for the good of one another and the glory of his name. It is simple. So many Christians either don't know what they should do or are distracted from the simple, basic things that they are called to, which are actually meaningful ministry, though they might not even realize it. It doesn't seem like it maybe, but it is. So people come to pastors in many churches and say, we need to do this or that. Now, my answer is this: if we don't have the people willing and able to do it within the body, we don't need to do that. Why? Because I really believe this text that we're to equip the saints for the work of ministry, and there aren't saints that are willing to minister in that way. Guess what? I'm 99.9% sure that God's not calling us to do that. Because he supplies for the need, provides the people if he's calling us to it. This totally renovates our thinking about the church. So many people go to a church for what they can get. So many people look for a church that has all the specific niche things that they think that they feel or they want or they need. Few people look for a church with an attitude of, are there pastors who will faithfully give me the word, and is this a church where I will be able to minister to other believers? And this also blows culturally accepted conceptions of ministry out of the water. If we think of ministry almost exclusively in terms of programming and top-down organized things, we think of the church and ministry as a pyramid. It's not. It's very flat. Very flat, with one person at the top, and that is Jesus Christ. So in this text, every believer is to be involved in the work of ministry. So let me ask you a question. Let's say that you're new here at Arbor Drive, as some of you maybe are. And let's say also that you're a bit of an introvert, right? And you come here and like, how can I be involved? I want to be involved in ministry. I want to do ministry. So you start thinking through it. Like, what do we normally think of with ministry? Well, the greeters. No, I'm an introvert. I don't like talking to new people, right? Some of you're laughing because you get it. You've been here a year and you still break out in cold sweat if somebody walks in your direction and makes eye contact. I get it, right? So not greeters out, right? Not the welcome desk, because you're going to have to talk to people, and certainly not up here. Oh my gosh, everybody looking at you, and also you don't play an instrument or sing very well. So let me ask you this: where is there for you to fit in ministry? Maybe I'm like, I will be involved with something behind the scenes. Oh, nope, we're full up. We only have 8 slots for that, and we've got 9 people. There's somebody on the waiting list already. Right? Like, Now, in that conception of ministry, 99% of the people, 99% of the saints are actually really not able to minister to one another, and therefore are unable to fulfill this command in Scripture. Now listen, if we've organized our church in a way where 99 or 95, whatever the number, 85, let's just be generous, 80%, if we've organized our ministry in a way where 80% of the people of God cannot fulfill a direct and clear command of Scripture, we are not doing ministry correctly. We are hindering the saints, not equipping them. That's why this is a big deal. And you cannot make that square peg fit in the round hole of God's design. And this is also important because we've bought into the idea of a clergy-church distinction. The idea of a clergy and a laity has been detrimental to the health and growth of the church because it has given rise to a class of professionals whose job it is to do what everyone should be doing. I'll speak for all the pastors here. I think I can do this. If you disagree, stand up and yell at me and I'll stop. We are no different from you. Right? That's the big secret of pastoral ministry. Oh, he went to seminary. Certainly, he must have some sort of special, they give you some special juju there. Like it's around year 3, right before you graduate. Right? No, man. Gosh, you realize that how many guys I know that are dying in ministry, like literally dying inside because they feel like they have to be on all the time and they can't ever have any struggles and they can't actually be transparent about where they're at and how life is difficult for them as a Christian, just like it is for you as a Christian. You know how many guys I know that are in that place? And it's because the church expects them to be some sort of super Christian. And that's partly the fault of the church, but it's partly their fault too because they're aligning with those expectations and trying to meet them. We're no different. I get that there are particular responsibilities that come with God's calling for me, and I get that there is greater accountability because of the ministry God has charged me with and us with as elders to care for the souls through the ministry of the word that we will give an account for. Yet at the same time, many pastors are treated as though they're outsiders and somehow aren't a part of the body that's being built up. And here's what I mean. I don't have some sort of special access to God that you don't have. I don't have some clairvoyance into the will of God that you don't have. I happen to have certain gifts that manifest in a particular way, just like you. I'm not the pope of a small little church. One of the things that recovered in the Reformation was the priesthood of all believers. You have exactly the same standing and access before God that I do, that Josh does, that Ben does, that Blake does, that Mark does, that Ron does, that Eric does. Best kept secret in the church, man. We've created this whole thing. And it's time to knock the foundation out of it because it's crumbling. It's killing people. Here's what that also means. God's plan for the care of one another in this church involves you. We all need to take responsibility for the charge that God has given us to minister to one another. Let me put it this way. Visiting the sick and infirmed, prayer, discipling, counseling, showing love, meeting needs, evangelism. That is not my work. That is our work. All of us. Your visits are no more effectual than mine. Your prayers are just as effectual. We've got to get this if we're going to be a healthy, vibrant church. Because from this flows a vibrant church life that doesn't terminate on any one person save Christ. So pastors are nothing more than men God has gifted in a particular way that play a particular role in the church. And we need the church as much as you do. My family needs the church as much as you do. My kids are not held to a different standard than anybody else's kids. My wife is not held to a different standard than anybody else's wife. And I need this body for my health as much as you need us as pastors for your health. So let me tell you something. Every one of you can minister to the body in 1,000 different ways. If you're a parent, you're ministering to the body by bringing your children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. If you're a mother, you have a ministry. If you're a friend, you have a ministry. You minister through coming to the worship service, ready to serve your brothers and sisters by singing loudly, reading robustly, praying wholeheartedly, and receiving the word attentively in faith. You minister when you encourage someone, when you see a need and meet it. You minister when you notice a child and say hi and have a conversation with them. You minister when you pray for the body and for the people within the body. You minister when you help someone or take out or make a meal for them. You minister when you grieve with someone. You minister when you spend time with other believers and point them to Christ. You minister by pursuing Christ as an example for others. You minister when you visit somebody who is sick or pray for someone who is sick. When you encourage someone who is faint-hearted. When you help someone who is weak. You minister when you are faithful in your marriage and model what we see in Ephesians chapter 5. And I could go on and on and on. If we are going to be a church that God wants us to be, then we have to understand God's plan for the church. And then, once we understand, jump in. Both feet. Right? What I'm calling you to do right now is I am not calling you to dip a toe in and see what the temperature is and see if it's okay for you. I'm calling you to jump in, both feet, full-blown, cannonball, all in. If what I am saying is lining up with God's word, that is the only response that we should have as believers. We'll figure out how it all works later. We'll trust God with that. In the meantime, go do. And all you need to do to be able to jump in with both feet is say a prayer and spend some time praying, asking God that he would open your eyes and then that he would give you the faith to respond to his truth. And when you do, I promise you will be blessed. So many people think that spiritual growth is an individual sport. That happens to them, just them. It happens in isolation. And the focus of this text is the church as a whole, and everyone is invested in it. It's a team sport. The most profound times of spiritual growth in my life did not happen in isolation. I was hearing this morning, hearing Elizabeth Montgomery share her testimony. And she was talking about a very difficult time in her life. And I've heard more than what she shared. And so without giving anything away that's not mine to tell, let me just say that the church was the church and cared for her well. You know what she didn't say? Oh, my pastor. It was the church. We need that. We all need that. Growth happens by faithfully proclaiming the word and applying it as loving shepherds and then living it out in community where we all benefit from one another and serve one another, where I invest in others and they invest in me. And that's the sweet spot for growth. And just to wrap this up, far from being discouraging, this should be super encouraging to you. Here's why. God has given many, and when we all do our part, the body flourishes. The weight is on no one person. God put you here to help others. You, and the unique ways that God has wired and gifted you, is actually part of God's plan for the growth of this church. That means that your role to play is just as important as whoever stands up here and preaches, or whoever leads worship, or whoever greets. It's just as important as anybody else in this room right now. It is a necessary part. For now, I want to ask you, are you going to sit on the side of the pool, or are you going to jump in? You do not have to have it all figured out, and I am not going to give you a 10-step process for this. I'm sorry that I'm not sorry. All you have to do is act in faith when you see the opportunity and ask that God would open your eyes to see the opportunities. Do your part. Fulfill your ministry. God blesses that. That is God's will and design for his church. And as each of us do that, I know that in 10 years we'll look back and see growth and fruit that came from that, which seemed absent when we were looking at last month or last week or last year. So the call from Scripture this morning is give ourselves to that work together. Bear one another's burdens and fulfill the law of Christ. Let's pray.